What happens when the most powerful alpha in the werewolf realm creates a trial so brutal that 27 elite Luna candidates, daughters of alphas, decorated warriors, wolves from the most prestigious bloodlines, all fail within days, and the only person who passes is a weak Omega that 3 different packs rejected as worthless? Philip Collins, Alpha King of the Crimson Moon Pack, had been searching for his fated mate for 5 years through increasingly impossible trials that tested everything from combat prowess to supernatural abilities. Every candidate came prepared, trained, confident they'd succeed where others had failed. Every single one broke before the week was done. Some couldn't handle the physical demands. Others failed the mental challenges. A few made it to the final trial, the one nobody talked about afterward, and emerged so traumatized they refused to speak of what they'd experienced. 27 perfect candidates in 5 years. 27 catastrophic failures. Then Margaret Morgan registered for the trial. Margaret, a 24-year-old Omega so weak she'd been rejected by the Riverside Pack at 18, the Thornwood Pack at 20, and the Ashford Pack at 22. Margaret, whose wolf was so pathetic she could barely shift, whose supernatural abilities were non-existent, whose rank was so low that even other Omegas pitied her. When she showed up at the Crimson Moon Pack complex to register, the administrators laughed. When she insisted she was serious, they assumed it was a joke. When she actually completed the registration, they accepted her application only because pack law required all willing applicants to be considered. Nobody expected Margaret Morgan to last 5 minutes in a trial that had broken the strongest wolves alive. And then she passed. Not barely. Not by luck. She passed every impossible test, survived every brutal challenge, and completed the final trial that had psychologically destroyed 27 elite candidates. When Philip Collins declared that Margaret Morgan, the rejected, worthless Omega nobody wanted, had succeeded where every perfect candidate had failed, the werewolf world stopped talking and started asking one question: how? Think this is just a lucky Omega getting an unexpected win? You're missing the entire conspiracy. Because what nobody knows, not the failed candidates, not Philip's counsel, not even Margaret herself, is that she's not actually an Omega. She's a Silver Peak wolf, the rarest bloodline in existence, hidden since infancy by suppression magic so powerful it fooled every werewolf who ever scented her. What Philip knows but hasn't revealed is that his impossible trial was never designed to find just any Luna. It was designed specifically to identify a Silver Peak wolf, the only bloodline capable of breaking the ancient curse slowly killing him and his entire pack. Hit subscribe, because this story is about to reveal that sometimes being rejected is protection, sometimes weakness is camouflage, sometimes the impossible trial is actually a rescue mission, and sometimes the Omega nobody wanted is the only wolf powerful enough to save them all. Margaret Morgan's shift at Riverside General Hospital ended at 6 a.m. She clocked out, changed out of her janitor's uniform, and walked to the bus stop in the pre-dawn darkness, invisible to the humans rushing to their own jobs and equally invisible to any werewolves who might pass by. Being invisible was Margaret's specialty. At 24, she'd perfected the art of being so unremarkable that people's eyes slid past her without registering her presence. It was a survival skill she'd developed after her third pack rejection, after accepting that she'd never be important enough for anyone to actually see. The bus ride to her studio apartment took 40 minutes. Margaret spent it staring out the window, watching the city wake up, thinking about the advertisement she'd seen posted at the Supernatural Community Center. Alpha King Philip Collins seeks Luna. Trial begins May 1st. All ranks welcome to apply. All ranks welcome. Margaret had seen 5 years of these announcements. Had watched elite candidates arrive with fanfare and leave in disgrace. Had heard the whispers about Philip's impossible standards, his brutal trials, his apparent inability to find a mate despite being the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. She'd never considered applying herself. What would be the point? She was Omega, the lowest rank, the weakest wolf, the one nobody wanted. But the advertisement said all ranks are welcome. And Margaret was tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of working night shifts cleaning up after humans who didn't know she existed. Tired of living half a life because she'd been born with a wolf too weak to matter. What was the worst that could happen if she applied? She'd fail like everyone else? She'd be humiliated? People would laugh at the pathetic Omega who thought she could compete with elite candidates? They already laughed at her. Margaret made a decision that would change everything. She went home, showered, dressed in the nicest clothes she owned, thrift store purchases that were clean but clearly second-hand, and took a different bus to the Crimson Moon Pack territory. The registration office was in the main administrative building. Margaret entered, approached the desk, and told the receptionist she wanted to register for the Luna trial. The receptionist, a beautiful beta female with perfect hair and clothes that cost more than Margaret's monthly rent, looked up, assessed Margaret in one dismissive glance, and smiled with pity. "I'm sorry, but registration requires pack sponsorship or verified rank credentials," the receptionist said in the tone of someone explaining reality to a child. "The advertisement said all ranks are welcome," Margaret replied quietly. "Yes, well, that's technically true, but realistically. Is it true or not?" Margaret interrupted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The receptionist's smile tightened. "It's true. But you should know that the trial is extremely demanding. Previous candidates have included alpha daughters, elite warriors, wolves from ancient bloodlines." "I'd like to register," Margaret said. The receptionist stared at her for a long moment. "Your name and current pack affiliation?" "Margaret Morgan." "No pack affiliation." "Previous packs?" "Riverside Pack, rejected at 18. Thornwood Pack, rejected at 20. Ashford Pack, rejected at 22. The receptionist's eyebrows rose. 3 rejections was unusual. "Rank?" "Omega." The receptionist's professional mask slipped, revealing genuine surprise. "You're an Omega. With no pack. 3 previous rejections. And you want to compete in Alpha King Philip's Luna trial, which has broken 27 elite candidates in 5 years." "Yes," Margaret said simply. "May I ask why?" "Because the advertisement said all ranks are welcome. Because I'm tired of being invisible. Because the worst thing that happens is I fail like everyone else, and at least then I'll know I tried." The receptionist studied Margaret, and something in her expression shifted, not quite respect, but acknowledgement. "All right," she decided. "I'll process your application." "But Margaret?" "The trial starts with a physical assessment designed for warriors. Most Omegas can't even complete the warm-up." "I'll manage," Margaret said. The registration process took 30 minutes. When it was done, the receptionist handed Margaret a packet. "Trial begins Monday at 6 a.m. You're housed in the pack complex for the duration. Pack whatever you need for an extended stay." "Thank you," Margaret said. As she turned to leave, the receptionist called after her, "Good luck. You're going to need it." Margaret walked out with a registration confirmation and a growing sense that she'd just done something incredibly stupid or incredibly important. She wasn't sure which. But she had 4 days to prepare for a trial that had destroyed 27 perfect candidates. 4 days before she either proved she was more than what everyone had labeled her, or confirmed what 3 packs had already decided, that Margaret Morgan was worthless. The voice in her head, the one that sounded like her wolf but somehow different, older, deeper, stirred for the first time in years. Finally, it whispered. "Finally, you're ready." Margaret had no idea what that meant. But she was about to find out. Monday morning arrived with gray skies that matched Margaret's anxiety. She stood outside the Crimson Moon Pack complex at 5:45 a.m. with a duffel bag containing a week's worth of clothes, basic toiletries, and the medical documentation required. Other candidates arrived in luxury vehicles, sleek cars driven by pack members who'd come to support their representatives. They emerged dressed in designer athletic wear, carrying expensive luggage, accompanied by entourages. Margaret had arrived by bus. Alone. Carrying a discount store duffel bag. The contrast was not subtle. At exactly 6 a.m., Alpha King Philip Collins entered the assembly hall. Margaret had seen photos of him, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of his presence. Philip was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of build that came from both genetics and serious training. Dark hair, sharp features, and eyes that assessed everyone with calculated precision. His aura, the supernatural pressure all alphas emanated, was overwhelming. "Welcome to the Luna trial," Philip said, his voice carrying easily. "I am Alpha King Philip Collins of the Crimson Moon Pack. For the next week, you will face challenges designed to test whether you're capable of ruling beside me." He paused. "The trial has 3 phases: physical, mental, and spiritual. Most candidates fail the physical phase. Those who survive often fail the mental challenges. The spiritual phase has broken every candidate who's reached it for 5 years." A murmur went through the candidates. "You may withdraw at any time with no shame," Philip continued. "But once you begin a phase, you must complete it or be disqualified. There are no second chances." His gaze swept across the candidates, and for one brief moment, his eyes landed on Margaret at the back of the room. Something flickered in his expression: surprise, interest, something Margaret couldn't identify. "Phase 1 begins in 30 minutes, Philip announced. "Prepare yourself." The training grounds were massive, an outdoor facility with obstacle courses, combat rings, and equipment that looked designed to break bodies. "Complete the obstacle course in under 15 minutes, a scarred beta trainer announced. "If you can't finish, you're not physically capable of surviving as Luna." Margaret looked at the course and felt her stomach drop. Walls requiring serious upper body strength. Balance beams at dangerous heights. Rope climbs. Obstacles assuming supernatural wolf strength. This wasn't designed for omegas. This was designed for warriors. The first candidates completed the course easily, 12 minutes, 13 minutes. Others followed with varying success. A few didn't finish and were disqualified. Then it was Margaret's turn. She approached the starting line aware that every eye was on her, every wolf assessing the weak omega who somehow thought she belonged. "You don't have to do this," the trainer said quietly. "There's no shame in withdrawing before you get injured." "I'll try," Margaret replied. "Trying isn't going to prevent you from breaking bones when you fall." "Then I'll break bones." "Start the timer." The trainer sighed. "Your time starts, now." Margaret ran. The first obstacle was a wall, 10 feet of smooth surface requiring extraordinary strength to scale. Margaret had neither strength nor agility. She tried 3 times, failing each. On her 4th attempt, something strange happened. The voice in her head, her wolf that wasn't quite her wolf, spoke with authority that made Margaret's body move before her brain could overthink. "Stop trying to climb like them. Use your size. Find the weakness." Margaret looked differently. Saw structural supports at the edges. Saw that her smaller frame could wedge into spaces larger wolves wouldn't fit. She used the supports like a ladder, wedging herself into tight spots, climbing with technique rather than strength. Slower than elite candidates' methods, but it worked. She cleared the wall with 8 minutes remaining. The next obstacles came fast: balance beams she crossed with terrified focus, rope climbs she managed through stubbornness, gaps she jumped that were almost too wide. She fell twice. got up both times. Kept moving. At 15 minutes, Margaret was still 50 yards from the finish, scrambling over the last obstacle with bleeding hands and trembling muscles. She didn't finish in time. But she finished. At 16 minutes and 43 seconds, gasping for air, bleeding from scrapes, she crossed the finish line. The trainer looked at Philip, who'd been watching without expression. Philip studied Margaret for a long moment. She finished, he said. Over the time limit, Alpha, the trainer pointed out. She finished, Philip repeated, his tone making it clear he was not debating this. Without supernatural strength, without warrior training, without anything except determination. That counts. The trainer nodded. Margaret Morgan advances to phase 2. Margaret stared at Philip, shocked he'd bent his own rules to let her pass. Philip met her gaze across the training ground, and something in his expression made Margaret's wolf stir with recognition. He knows, the voice whispered. He's been waiting for you. Margaret had no idea what that meant. But she'd just survived phase 1 of the impossible trial. And Philip Collins had bent his own time limit rules to let an Omega advance. Why? Phase 1 eliminated 8 candidates. The remaining 12 were given 30 minutes to rest before phase 2 began. Margaret sat apart from the elite candidates, bandaging her bleeding hands, trying not to think about how badly her body hurt. An elegant alpha daughter named Seraphine approached. You're the Omega who failed the time limit, she said. Yes, Margaret replied. And Alpha King Philip let you advance anyway. Apparently. Why do you think he did that? Seraphine's tone suggested she had theories, none flattering to Margaret. I don't know. Maybe he felt sorry for me. Alpha King Philip doesn't do pity. Everything he does has purpose. So either you're more important than you appear, or he's testing something by keeping you in the trial. She left before Margaret could respond. Phase 2 began in a conference room. The 12 remaining candidates were seated at individual desks, each with a tablet displaying a complex scenario. Philip stood at the front. Phase 2 tests mental acuity and strategic thinking. Luna of Crimson Moon doesn't just stand beside me looking pretty. She rules. Makes decisions affecting thousands. Handles crises. Navigates political complexity. He gestured to the tablets. You have 2 hours to analyze the scenario and provide a solution. The scenario involves a territorial dispute, limited resources, multiple competing interests, and potential for violence. Resolve it benefiting Crimson Moon while minimizing casualties and maintaining alliances. Can we ask questions? One candidate inquired. No. Part of the test is working with incomplete information. Your time starts now. Margaret read her scenario with growing dismay. It was complex, 3 neighboring packs in conflict over border territories containing valuable hunting grounds. Each had legitimate historical claims. Each had different strengths and weaknesses. Crimson Moon was being pressured to intervene by all 3 sides while dealing with internal pack tensions. Previous candidates had approached this as a power play, back the strongest pack, leverage authority, force compliance. Margaret read those failed approaches in the scenario notes. But something felt wrong. Why were 3 packs suddenly fighting over territory they'd shared peacefully for generations? What had changed? Margaret dug into background information, looking for patterns elite candidates had missed. She found it buried in economic data. The territorial dispute wasn't about hunting grounds. It was about a proposed highway development cutting through disputed territory. Whichever pack controlled the land would receive substantial compensation from human developers. The conflict was manufactured. Someone was deliberately escalating tensions to profit. Margaret built her solution around that revelation. Instead of picking winners, she proposed exposing the manufactured conflict, investigating who was profiting from escalation, and working with all three packs to share development compensation equitably. It wasn't the dominant pick a side and enforce approach elite candidates favored. It was question the premise and expose manipulation nobody else had considered. 2 hours later, Philip collected tablets and reviewed submissions while candidates waited in tense silence. After 30 minutes, he spoke. 11 of you approached this as a power exercise. You identified the strongest pack, calculated leverage, and proposed forcing compliance through authority or threat. Valid strategies. Also exactly what I expected from candidates trained in traditional pack politics. He paused. One of you questioned whether the conflict was legitimate. Investigated underlying economic factors. Identified that the dispute was manufactured to exploit pack tensions for financial gain. And proposed a solution that exposed manipulation rather than just managing symptoms. Philip's gaze landed on Margaret. Margaret Morgan's approach was unconventional. It required thinking beyond immediate power dynamics to identify systemic manipulation. This is the strategic thinking Luna of Crimson Moon requires. The room went silent. Wait, Seraphine said, her voice tight. You're saying the Omega outperformed all of us? I'm saying Margaret identified what the scenario was actually testing, the ability to question assumptions rather than work within them. Strategic thinking isn't about following established protocols. It's about seeing what others miss. He dismissed candidates for a meal break, but Margaret stayed behind. Alpha King Philip, she said quietly as others filed out. He turned, giving her his full attention. Why did you design these trials this way? The physical test favoring technique over strength. The mental test rewarding questioning assumptions. These aren't standard Luna trial approaches. No, Philip agreed. They're not. So what are you actually testing for? Philip studied her with intensity that made Margaret's wolf stir. What do you know about your family history, Margaret? Nothing. I was left at an orphanage as an infant. No records of my parents. No pack affiliation. And your wolf? How would you describe it? Weak. Barely functional. I didn't shift properly until I was 17. Suppressed, Philip finished. Your wolf isn't weak. It's suppressed by magic so powerful that every werewolf who's ever scented you believed you were Omega. Margaret's heart stopped. What? You're not Omega, Margaret. You're Silver Peak, the rarest bloodline in werewolf history. Your abilities were suppressed as an infant to hide you from people who've been hunting your kind to extinction for generations. Philip's voice was steady. My trial was designed to identify a Silver Peak wolf. Because you're the only bloodline that can break the curse killing my pack. The world tilted. Margaret sat down heavily. That's impossible. I'm nobody. You're somebody whose entire life has been orchestrated, Philip interrupted. Protected and sabotaged simultaneously. The people who hid you kept you safe but powerless. The people hunting your bloodline made sure you stayed that way. The 3-pack rejections? Manipulated. Someone has been tracking you, making sure you never settled anywhere long enough to attract attention. Philip moved closer. I've been searching for a Silver Peak wolf for 5 years. The 27 candidates who failed? They were cover bait designed to make the trial look legitimate while I desperately searched for the one bloodline that could save my pack. Why tell me now? Because Phase 3 is the spiritual trial. It will break the suppression magic hiding your true nature. You'll either fully awaken as Silver Peak and have the power to choose whether to help me, or the suppression will kill you trying to maintain itself. Margaret's hands shook. So I die or I become something I don't understand? Or you withdraw now and go back to being the Omega nobody wanted, living under suppression that will eventually kill you anyway. Philip's voice was gentle despite brutal honesty. I can't make this choice for you. But you were never meant to be Omega. You were meant to be powerful enough to challenge forces controlling werewolf society. The question is whether you're brave enough to find out what you really are. What happens in Phase 3? The spiritual trial confronts you with your deepest fear and truest self. For most candidates, it reveals their identity is built on lies. It breaks them because they can't handle the truth about themselves. Philip's eyes never left hers. For you, it will reveal what you are beneath suppression. It will hurt. You might not survive. But if you do, you'll finally know what Margaret Morgan was meant to be. Margaret thought about her life, the rejections, the isolation, the nights cleaning hospital floors while pretending she didn't exist. She thought about the voice in her head that had guided her through the obstacle course. She thought about what it would mean to finally know what she really was. I'll do it, Margaret decided. I'll attempt Phase 3. Philip nodded slowly. Then meet me tomorrow morning at dawn. Come alone. Phase 3 isn't witnessed by other candidates. He left her alone with a choice made in terror building. Tomorrow, Margaret Morgan would either die or discover she'd never been the worthless Omega everyone believed. She wasn't sure which outcome terrified her more. So Margaret passed Phase 2 by being the only candidate smart enough to question whether the problem was real. Critical thinking activated, discovered she's not actually Omega but a suppressed Silver Peak wolf from an extinct bloodline. Identity crisis unlocked. Learned Philip designed the entire trial specifically to find her because she's the only one who can break his pack's curse. Strategic romance. And now has to decide whether to attempt Phase 3, which will either awaken her true nature or kill her trying. No pressure. Subscribe now, because what comes after involves Margaret's awakening being way more dramatic than anyone expected, the people hunting Silver Peak wolves realizing one survived, and both Margaret and Philip discovering that sometimes the impossible trial is actually a rescue mission disguised as a mate search. Margaret barely slept. She lay in the quarters provided for trial candidates, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything Philip had told her. Not Omega. Silver Peak. Suppressed. Hunted. At 5 a.m., Margaret gave up on sleep. She dressed and made her way to the meditation chamber deep in the Pack Complex's spiritual wing. Philip was already there, standing in a circular room completely empty except for symbols carved into the stone floor. You came, he said. I said I would. People say many things when given time to reconsider. Philip gestured to the center of the circle. Stand there. Don't move once the ritual begins. What's going to happen? The suppression magic hiding your nature will be challenged by ancient pack magic designed to reveal truth. If the suppression is weak enough, it will break and you'll awaken as Silver Peak. If it's too strong, it will fight back. That fight happens inside your mind and body. Most people can't survive that kind of internal conflict. And the other candidates faced their own truths? Yes. Most couldn't handle what they saw. Philip moved to the edge of the circle. You're the first one I've actually hoped would survive this. Why? Because you need me to break your curse? Because you deserve to know what you really are. Curse or no curse, you deserve truth. Margaret stepped into the center of the circle. Philip began speaking in ancient Pack tongue. The symbols on the floor began to glow. Margaret felt something press against her mind, not painful exactly, but invasive, probing, searching for the suppression magic. It found it. The pain was immediate and catastrophic. Margaret screamed as the suppression magic fought back. Inside her mind, she saw memories she didn't remember, her parents running through forest, carrying an infant, placing that infant at an orphanage with desperate instructions to keep her hidden. She saw the moment suppression magic was placed on her. Saw her wolf, beautiful, powerful, silver white, locked behind magical barriers that made her appear weak and pathetic. She saw the tracking. Different people throughout her life, watching from a distance, making sure she stayed isolated but alive. She saw the rejections. Pack alphas manipulated into turning her away, fed lies about her worth. All of it was orchestrated. All designed to keep her powerless and hidden. The suppression magic cracked. Margaret's wolf surged forward with 24 years of compressed power, smashing through barriers that had held it captive. The pain intensified beyond anything Margaret had experienced. Her body was changing, her magic awakening, everything she'd believed about herself shattering as truth emerged. She was Silver Peak. She could sense dark magic. Could identify supernatural corruption. Could nullify curses and manipulations other wolves couldn't perceive. She was powerful. Had always been powerful. Had just been forced to forget it. The suppression magic made one final attempt to reassert control, and Margaret felt herself breaking under pressure of two opposing forces. Then Philip's voice cut through chaos. "Margaret. You are not Omega. Accept what you are." Something in his command, his alpha authority combined with pack magic, gave Margaret's awakening wolf the boost it needed. The suppression shattered completely. Margaret collapsed to the stone floor, gasping, her body trembling with released power that had been compressed for 24 years. When she finally looked up, Philip was staring at her with something like awe. "Your eyes," he said. "They're silver." Margaret touched her face, feeling the difference. Everything about her felt sharper, stronger, more real. "What am I?" she whispered. "You're Silver Peak. And you're the most powerful one I've ever read about." Philip approached slowly. "How do you feel?" "Like I'd been wearing a suit 3 sizes too small and I finally took it off." Margaret's voice sounded different, more confident, more present. "I can see things. Sense things. There's magic in this room, old magic, protective spells. That's your Silver Peak sight. You perceive supernatural energies normal wolves can't detect." Philip extended his hand. "Can you stand?" Margaret took his hand and was startled by the jolt of awareness that shot through her at contact. She could sense Philip's magic, his wolf, and underneath it all. "You're cursed," Margaret said, shocked she could see it so clearly. "Dark magic, woven through your bloodline, feeding on your pack bonds. It's killing you slowly." "Yes. It's been killing the Crimson Moon for 2 generations." Philip's voice tightened. "My father tried to break it and failed. My mother died from the attempt. My sister tried when I became alpha. The curse consumed her in 3 days. And you want me to break it? I want to offer you a choice now that you know what you are. You can leave. Take your awakened powers and build a life away from conspiracies and curses. Nobody would blame you. Or you stay. We bond as mates. Our combined magic gives you the power to identify the curse's source and neutralize it. Together we face whatever force has been hunting your bloodline and cursing my pack." Margaret looked at this alpha king who'd spent 5 years running elaborate trials to find her, who'd protected her awakening even though it could have killed her. "What happens to your pack if I leave?" "We continue dying slowly. I'll keep searching for another solution, though I don't know what that would be. Silver Peak wolves are extinct except for you." Margaret felt the weight of the choice. But she also felt something else, the mate bond Philip had mentioned, pulling her toward him with intensity that had nothing to do with obligation. Her wolf wanted him. Recognized him as partner, as equal, as the other half of something incomplete her entire life. If I stay and we bond, what then? Then we expose the conspiracy controlling werewolf society. We identify everyone who participated in hunting Silver Peak wolves. We dismantle corrupt power structures. Philip's voice was steady. It won't be easy or safe. But it's war against people who deserve it. Margaret thought about all the years she'd been nobody. Thought about parents she'd never known who'd hidden her to keep her safe. Thought about the voice in her head that had always whispered she was meant for more. I'll stay, she decided. I'll bond with you. I'll break your curse. And then we're going after whoever did this to both of us. Philip's relief was palpable. Then we start tonight. The bonding ritual requires. Alarms shrieked through the complex. Philip's head snapped up, his entire body shifting into combat mode. What is that? Margaret asked. Perimeter breach. Multiple hostiles. Philip was already moving. Someone knows you awakened. They're coming for you. Who? The same people who've been hunting Silver Peak wolves for generations. The moment your suppression broke, they knew. Philip pulled her toward the exit. We need to get you somewhere secure. Or we face them, Margaret said, surprising herself. I'm not running anymore. I spent 24 years hiding from my own power. I'm done with that. Philip stared at her. You just awakened. You don't know how to use your abilities. Then teach me fast. Because whoever's coming is going to find out that suppressing a Silver Peak wolf just made her angrier. Through their growing bond, Philip felt Margaret's determination. And smiled. Then let's introduce you to the conspiracy that's about to regret letting you live this long. The perimeter breach was 12 heavily armed werewolves who moved with military precision. Margaret could see the dark magic clinging to them, not suppression like what had been placed on her, but enhancement. Curse magic that made them stronger, faster, more vicious than natural wolves. They were hunters. Specifically designed to kill Silver Peak bloodline. Philip shifted partially, enough to access his alpha strength while maintaining human form, and positioned himself between Margaret and the approaching threat. Stay behind me, he ordered. I can fight, Margaret protested. You can see dark magic. That doesn't mean you know how to neutralize it in combat. Then tell me how. The hunters burst through the outer defenses. Philip met the first three head-on, his alpha power making him a blur of lethal violence. But there were too many. And they were targeting Margaret, trying to bypass Philip to reach her. Margaret's Silver Peak sight showed her the curse magic enhancing them. Showed her exactly how dark energy was woven through their bodies. And showed her the weak points. The center of their chest. Margaret shouted. The curse anchor's there. Break the anchor and they lose enhancement. Philip adjusted immediately, striking with precision that targeted the curse anchors Margaret identified. The first hunter dropped, his enhancement shattered. But more were coming. Margaret felt something stir in her newly awakened abilities. Her Silver Peak power didn't just see dark magic, it could nullify it. She reached out with instincts she didn't consciously understand, touching the curse magic from a distance. And pulled. The nearest hunter screamed as his enhancement unraveled, dark magic ripping away from his body and dissolving into nothing. Margaret staggered from the effort. It had taken enormous energy. But it worked. Again. Philip commanded, taking down two more hunters whose enhancements Margaret had weakened. Margaret focused on the next cluster, reaching out with Silver Peak abilities, grabbing curse magic and pulling. 3 hunters dropped simultaneously as their enhancements shattered. The remaining hunters retreated, recognizing their target was more dangerous than anticipated. But they didn't flee. They regrouped, and Margaret saw something worse emerging from the shadows. Not enhanced werewolves. Something else. Something radiating dark magic so powerfully that even normal wolves could sense it. A dark mage. The source of the enhancement curses. That's what we're really facing, Philip said grimly. The hunters are pawns. The mages are the real threat. The dark mage raised their hands, and curse magic lashed out at Margaret with lethal intent. Margaret's Silver Peak abilities reacted instinctively. She didn't just nullify the attack, she absorbed it, pulling dark magic into herself and neutralizing it completely. The mage stared in shock. That's impossible. Silver Peak wolves can't absorb dark magic. You should be dead. Maybe I'm special, Margaret shot back. She reached for the mage's magic the same way she'd reached for the hunter's enhancements. The mage threw up defensive wards, but Margaret's Silver Peak sight showed her where protections were weakest. She pulled. The mage's wards shattered. Their control over remaining hunters broke. Without the mage's support, the hunters were just ordinary wolves facing an enraged Alpha King and a Silver Peak who'd just discovered she was terrifying. The fight ended quickly. When the last hunter was subdued, Philip turned to Margaret. You absorbed active curse magic. That's not supposed to be possible. Maybe the suppression changed how my abilities work, Margaret suggested. Or maybe I'm different somehow. Before they could discuss further, more alarms sounded, internal this time, coming from deeper in the complex. The curse, Philip gasped, dropping to one knee as dark magic flared through his bloodline. It's reacting to your awakening. It knows you're here. It's trying to kill me faster to prevent you from breaking it. Margaret could see it now, the curse woven through Philip, feeding on his pack bonds, slowly killing everyone connected to Crimson Moon's alpha bloodline. We need to do the bonding ritual now, Margaret decided. If the curse kills you before we bond, I lose the power boost I need to neutralize it. The ritual takes hours. Then we do the emergency version. Margaret had no idea how she knew there was an emergency version, but her Silver Peak instincts were certain. Alpha command and blood oath. It won't be as strong as full ritual, but it'll create the mate bond fast enough to combine our powers. Philip looked at her. Emergency bonding is permanent. Can't be broken even if we later decide we're incompatible. Then we'd better be compatible. Margaret offered her hand. I didn't survive 24 years of suppression just to lose you to a curse before we even get started. Philip took her hand, and Margaret felt the mate bond snap into place with the force of lightning. Their powers merged, his alpha authority and her Silver Peak abilities combining into something exponentially stronger. Margaret's vision exploded with supernatural sight. She could see everything, every curse, every dark magic thread, every manipulation affecting Crimson Moon Pack. And she could see the curse killing Philip with perfect clarity. It was massive. Sophisticated. Woven through 3 generations with malicious precision. But it had a source. An anchor point. Someone who'd originally cast it and maintained it through sustained connection. I can see who cursed you, Margaret said. They're close. In the pack complex. Someone named Davina Thornwood. She's in the East Wing administrative offices. She's been part of your pack for years, and she's been slowly poisoning your bloodline since your father was alpha. Philip's face went hard. Davina has been my chief administrator for 8 years. She helped rebuild after my parents died. She's the mage who cursed you, Margaret interrupted. And she's currently trying to kill you faster because I awakened and bonded with you. Then we end this now. Philip stood despite the curse trying to drag him down. Can you break it? If I get to the source, yes. But breaking a curse this old and powerful will hurt both of us. The backlash. I don't care about the backlash. I care about saving my pack. Philip's eyes met hers. Together? Together, Margaret agreed. They moved through the complex with guards closing in around them. Davina was in her office, exactly where Margaret's Silver Peak site had shown. She looked up when Philip and Margaret entered, and her expression shifted from professional surprise to hatred. "You actually found a Silver Peak," Davina said. "I told the council it was impossible. Told them the bloodline was extinct. But they insisted on maintaining tracking magic just in case." "Why curse my family?" Philip demanded. "Your grandfather refused to join the council's power consolidation 50 years ago. Refused to help hunt the Silver Peak bloodline. So the council cursed your family as punishment and as an example." Davina's smile was cold. "We've been killing you slowly for 3 generations. Almost, Margaret agreed. Except now I'm here. And I can see exactly how you've been maintaining the curse." She reached out with her combined Silver Peak and Mate Bond power, grabbing the curse threads connecting Davina to Philip. And pulled. The curse fought back with every ounce of power Davina had invested in it over decades. The backlash was catastrophic. Margaret felt her bones cracking under pressure, felt Philip screaming beside her as the curse tried to take him with it. But she didn't let go. She pulled harder, using the mate bond to anchor herself, using Philip's alpha power to boost her Silver Peak abilities. The curse shattered. Davina shrieked as decades of dark magic unraveled, backlash consuming her from within. Philip collapsed, free from the curse but damaged from violent removal. Margaret caught him, her own body trembling from exhaustion. "Did it work?" Philip gasped. "The curse is broken," Margaret confirmed. "Your pack is free." But Davina mentioned a council. "This isn't over." "I know." Philip managed to sit up despite injuries. "The Council of Shadows has been controlling werewolf politics for generations. They're the ones who ordered the Silver Peak bloodline hunted to extinction. Then we take them down." Margaret's voice was steady. "They cursed your family. They suppressed me. They've been manipulating werewolf society for generations. We expose them and dismantle their power." Philip looked at his newly bonded mate, the Omega who'd turned out to be the most powerful Silver Peak in history. "You realize that's declaring war on the most dangerous conspiracy in werewolf society?" "Yes. But I didn't survive being suppressed for 24 years just to let them continue controlling everyone." Margaret helped Philip stand. "Besides, you promised me purpose and meaning. This seems pretty meaningful." Despite everything, Philip laughed. "Welcome to Crimson Moon, Luna Margaret. Let's go save werewolf society from itself." Through their mate bond, Margaret felt his certainty, his pride, his absolute conviction that together they were strong enough to face whatever came next. Because the Council of Shadows had just learned that the Silver Peak bloodline wasn't extinct. And they were going to respond with everything they had. Word spread fast through werewolf society. Alpha King Philip Collins had bonded with an awakened Silver Peak wolf. The curse-killing Crimson Moon pack for 3 generations was broken. And Davina Thornwood, a trusted administrator, had been exposed as a dark mage working for the Council of Shadows. Margaret spent 3 days recovering from the backlash of breaking Philip's curse while also learning to actually use her Silver Peak abilities instead of just acting on instinct. "You're trying to force it," Philip said, watching Margaret attempt to nullify a practice curse. "Silver Peak abilities work through perception and will, not force." "That's not helpful advice," Margaret muttered. "See the curse completely. Understand how it's constructed. Then will it to stop existing." Philip moved behind her, his hands on her shoulders, their mate bond allowing him to guide her perception. "Stop fighting it and just see it." Margaret stopped trying to force the curse to break and instead just looked at it with her Silver Peak sight. The curse was woven from dark magic threads, anchored through specific pattern. Once she saw the pattern completely, understood how it worked, willing it to unravel was almost effortless. The curse dissolved. I did it. You did, Philip agreed. Now do it 50 more times until it's automatic. Margaret groaned but returned to practice. She was on her 30th successful nullification when Hadrian Corvus, Philip's beta, entered with urgent news. Alpha, we've received responses to your announcement about the Council of Shadows. 3 allied alphas want to meet. 2 are supportive. 1 is concerning. Concerning how? Alpha Mordecai Blackwood claims the council doesn't exist. Says we're creating conspiracy theories to justify bonding with an allegedly extinct bloodline. Hadrian's tone suggested what he thought of that. He's demanding you present proof or retract the accusations. Then we make them understand, Philip decided. Call a territory summit. Invite every major alpha. We'll present evidence, explain the conspiracy, and identify which leaders are compromised. That's dangerous, Hadrian warned. If council members attend, they'll have opportunity to eliminate you both. Let them try, Philip's voice was cold. Margaret can see dark magic corruption. We'll identify every council operative in the room. The territory summit was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Margaret used that time to train intensively. She practiced on Philip's pack members, scanning for any trace of council manipulation. Most were clean, but she found 3 who'd been subtly influenced without knowing it. Breaking those subtle influences was easier than destroying major curses, and the 3 pack members were grateful. You're getting better, Philip observed after Margaret successfully identified and neutralized 7 subtle manipulations in one afternoon. I'm starting to understand how they operate, Margaret replied. The council doesn't usually use heavy curses. They prefer subtle influences, making people doubt themselves, manipulating their judgment just enough to cause problems without being obvious. Which makes them harder to prove exist. Which makes them perfect for controlling werewolf society without anyone realizing they're being controlled. Margaret's voice was grim. How many alphas do you think are compromised? At least a quarter of major territory leaders. Maybe more. Philip pulled up files. That's why this meeting is so dangerous. The Territory Summit was held at Neutral Ground, a conference facility designed for major werewolf political gatherings. 23 alphas attended, representing the largest pack territories in the Northern Hemisphere. Margaret could see the dark magic immediately. 8 of the 23 alphas radiated council corruption. Not heavy curses, but subtle influences woven through their decision-making. She catalogued each one while Philip opened the summit with formal greetings. I've called this gathering to present evidence of a conspiracy that's been controlling werewolf politics for generations, Philip said. The Council of Shadows, Alpha Mordecai interrupted dismissively. Where's your proof? Standing beside me, Philip replied, gesturing to Margaret. My mate, Margaret Collins, is Silver Peak bloodline. Her abilities allow her to perceive dark magic normal wolves can't detect. Including the manipulation aid of you are currently carrying. The room exploded. Accusations flew. Some alphas demanded proof. Others looked nervously at their neighbors. Enough. Philip's alpha command silenced everyone. Margaret will demonstrate. She'll identify which alphas are carrying council corruption. Those individuals will have the opportunity to be freed if they cooperate. And if we refuse? Mordecai demanded. Then we assume you're working willingly with the council and act accordingly, Philip said coldly. Margaret stood, letting her Silver Peak sight activate visibly, her eyes shifting to silver, her power radiating in a way even non-magical wolves could sense. She pointed to the first compromised alpha. You. Dark magic influences your judgment regarding territory negotiations. specifically making you undermine alliances that would threaten council interests. The Alpha, a woman named Celestine Ravencroft, went pale. That's impossible. I would know. That's how council manipulation works. It hides itself. Margaret approached carefully. I can remove it if you allow me to touch you. Celestine hesitated, then nodded. Margaret placed her hand on the Alpha's shoulder and pulled. The manipulation unraveled quickly. Celestine gasped as the influence vanished. Oh gods. I've been sabotaging my own pack. I thought I was being strategic, but I was. You were being controlled, Margaret said gently. It's not your fault. She moved to the next compromised Alpha and repeated the process. By the fifth Alpha, the others were starting to believe. By the eighth, even Mordecai had gone quiet. When all 8 had been freed, Philip addressed the summit again. This is what the Council of Shadows does. They subtly influence leaders to make choices benefiting council interests while destroying pack unity. They've been doing this for generations. The only reason we can finally expose them is because a Silver Peak wolf survived their attempts to hunt the bloodline to extinction. What do you want from us? Celestine asked, shaken. Alliance. Cooperation. Help identifying other council operatives and dismantling their network. One of 3 Alphas Margaret hadn't identified stood abruptly. This is insanity. You're using conspiracy theories to consolidate power through fear. Margaret's Silver Peak sight showed something interesting. That Alpha wasn't carrying curse corruption. He was carrying protective wards, magic designed to hide his true nature. He's not manipulated, Margaret said. He's hiding something. Dark magic wards that make it harder to see what he really is. The Alpha's expression went cold. I've tolerated enough. I'm leaving. He turned to go, but Philip's guards blocked the exits. You're not leaving until Margaret examines you, Philip said. Because if you're innocent, you have nothing to hide. The Alpha shifted to wolf form, attempting to fight his way out. Philip met him halfway. The battle was brutal but quick. When the council operative was subdued, Margaret approached and placed her hand on his wolf form. The protective wards shattered, revealing decades of dark magic practice, multiple identities, and direct connection to council leadership. He's been a council operative his entire life, Margaret reported. Placed in Alpha position 30 years ago to control this territory. His whole identity is fabricated. The revelation shocked the assembled Alphas. We need systematic examination, Celestine said steadily. Every major Alpha. Every territory leader. We need to know who's compromised. That's what I'm proposing, Philip agreed. Margaret and I will travel to territories, identifying corruption and freeing wolves from manipulation. In return, we need your cooperation and protection. They already attacked us, Margaret added. They'll send more. Then we fight, another Alpha said, Theron Ashford. The council has been manipulating us for generations. It's time we took back control. One by one, Alphas pledged support. Not all. 3 refused, claiming they needed time to verify evidence. Margaret's sight suggested those 3 were likely council sympathizers. By the summit's end, Philip and Margaret had gained 17 allied Alphas willing to cooperate. It wasn't every territory. But it was a start. They're going to come for us with everything they have, Margaret said that night. The council knows we're dismantling their network. I know, Philip agreed. Which is why we're accelerating the plan. Tomorrow we start traveling to allied territories, systematically identifying and neutralizing council corruption. How long before they attack in force? Days. Maybe a week if we're lucky. Philip pulled Margaret close. But we knew this wouldn't be easy. Through their bond, Margaret felt Philip's determination. And her own matching it. She'd spent 24 years being nobody. Being powerless. She was done with that. If the council wanted to eliminate the last Silver Peak, they'd discover that suppressing her for 2 decades had just made her angrier. Let them come. She'd show them why hunting the Silver Peak bloodline to extinction had been their biggest mistake. The Council of Shadows struck 5 days after the Territory Summit. Not with hunters or cursed wolves, but with their most powerful operative, a dark mage who'd been alive for over 200 years, sustained by forbidden magic. The attack came at dawn when Margaret and Philip were preparing to travel to their first allied territory. The mage materialized in the Crimson Moon complex with a display of power that shattered defensive wards and sent guards scrambling. Silver Peak, the mage said, their voice carrying centuries of malice. I killed your ancestors. I orchestrated the hunts that destroyed your bloodline. And now I'll finish what I started. Margaret felt fear spike through her, but she also felt Philip beside her, felt their mate bond humming with combined power. You failed, Margaret replied, her voice steadier than she felt. My parents hid me. I survived. I awakened. And now I'm going to dismantle everything you built. The mage laughed. You're a child playing with powers you don't understand. I've been practicing dark magic since before your great-great-grandparents were born. They attacked with curse magic that would have killed a normal wolf instantly. Margaret's Silver Peak abilities reacted automatically, nullifying the attack. But this wasn't like fighting enhanced hunters or breaking static curses. This was active combat against a mage who'd spent 2 centuries perfecting their craft. The battle was brutal. The mage threw curse after curse, each one more sophisticated than the last. Margaret nullified them, but the effort was exhausting her rapidly. Philip attacked physically, trying to get close enough to use his alpha strength, but the mage kept him at bay with barriers of dark magic. Through their mate bond, Margaret felt Philip's frustration and her own exhaustion mounting. They were going to lose unless she tried something different. Margaret stopped just defending. Instead, she reached out with her Silver Peak abilities the way she had during the hunter attack, not to nullify the mage's power, but to grab it. To absorb it. The mage's next curse attack came straight at her. Instead of deflecting it, Margaret pulled it into herself. The dark magic flooded her system. It should have killed her. Should have corrupted her from within. Instead, her Silver Peak abilities neutralized it internally, breaking it down into harmless energy. And in doing so, Margaret felt something she'd never felt before. She understood the curse structure completely. Could see how the mage had constructed it. Could identify the source of their power. I see it, Margaret gasped. I can see your connection to the dark magic source. I can see how you've sustained yourself for 200 years. The mage's eyes widened. That's impossible. No Silver Peak has ever been able to trace active magic to its source. Maybe I'm special, Margaret said for the second time in a week. She reached out, not for the mage's attacks, but for the fundamental connection between the mage and their power source. And severed it. The mage screamed as 2 centuries of accumulated power unraveled in seconds. Their body, sustained far beyond natural lifespan by dark magic, began to age rapidly. They collapsed, transformed from ageless mage to ancient, powerless human in moments. The battle was over. When the mage was secured, barely conscious and no longer a threat, Philip turned to Margaret. You absorbed their curse magic and used it to trace their power source. That's impossible, I know, Margaret finished. But apparently I can do it anyway. Maybe because I was suppressed for so long? Maybe the compression changed how my abilities work? Or maybe you're just more powerful than any Silver Peak in history, Philip suggested. which is going to make the remaining council members even more desperate. The ancient mage, now powerless but still conscious, laughed bitterly. You think you've won? The council has operatives across every territory. Mages more powerful than me. Resources you can't imagine. Killing me changes nothing. We didn't kill you, Margaret pointed out. We neutralized you. And now you're going to tell us everything about the council's structure, their leadership, their plans. In exchange for not being left to die of old age in a cell. The mage looked between Philip and Margaret, calculating odds. What guarantee do I have that you'll keep your word? My word as Alpha King, Philip said. Cooperate fully, and I'll ensure you're cared for. Refuse, and you'll spend whatever time you have left alone in darkness. The mage considered for a long moment. The council's leadership meets quarterly at a location that changes. I don't know where the next meeting is, but I know who leads them. 3 ancient families who've controlled werewolf society for over 300 years. Over the next hours, the mage provided names, locations, and details about council operations that Margaret documented meticulously. By the time they were done, they had a comprehensive map of the conspiracy. It's worse than we thought, Margaret said, reviewing the information. The council has infiltrated every major territory. They've placed operatives in positions of power across the entire werewolf world. This is going to take years to dismantle. Then we have years, Philip replied. We have allied alphas. We have your abilities to identify corruption. We have evidence and testimony. We can do this. Margaret looked at the sheer scope of what they were facing. What if we can't? What if the council is too entrenched? Then we fight anyway, Philip said simply. Because the alternative is letting them continue controlling everyone. And I didn't watch you break free from suppression just to let them suppress werewolf society forever. Through their mate bond, Margaret felt his absolute conviction. And found her own courage matching it. Okay, she said. We do this systematically. We travel to allied territories, we identify and neutralize council operatives, we build our coalition, and we work toward exposing the leadership. Together, Philip confirmed. Always together, Margaret agreed. 6 months later. Margaret stood on the balcony of the Crimson Moon Pack House, watching the territory she now helped rule. 6 months ago, she'd been rejected by Omega cleaning hospital floors. Now she was Luna of the largest pack territory in the Northern Hemisphere, bonded to an Alpha King who looked at her like she'd hung the moon, and recognized across werewolf society as the Silver Peak who'd exposed the Council of Shadows conspiracy. Thinking about how much has changed? Philip asked, joining her. Thinking about how I almost didn't register for your trial, Margaret admitted. I almost talked myself out of it. Almost decided I was too weak, too worthless, too pathetic to even try. And instead you passed a trial designed specifically to find you, awakened as the most powerful Silver Peak in history, broke a 3-generation curse, and started dismantling a conspiracy that controlled werewolf society for centuries. Philip pulled her close. Not bad for a rejected Omega. Former rejected Omega, Margaret corrected. I'm pretty sure ruling a territory changes my rank. Does it bother you? That the trial was designed to find a Silver Peak? Margaret considered it honestly. No. Because even if you designed it strategically, what happened after was real. We chose each other. Choose to bond. Chose to fight together. That wasn't manipulation, it was partnership. Through their mate bond, she felt Philip's love and pride. 27 perfect candidates failed my trial, he said. All of them were exactly what werewolf society expected an alpha's mate to be, strong, beautiful, from prestigious bloodlines. But they weren't what I needed. You were. The rejected Omega nobody wanted turned out to be exactly what you needed, Margaret mused. There's poetry in that. There's justice in that, Philip corrected. Margaret looked out at the territory, at the wolves who now bowed to her as Luna, at the life she'd built from ruins of suppression and rejection. Do you think there are others? Other Silver Peak wolves living under suppression magic? Possibly. We've put out calls. If anyone recognizes the suppression pattern, they'll contact us. Philip's voice was gentle. Would you want to train them if we find others? Yes. Nobody should spend their life believing they're weak when they're actually powerful. If there are other suppressed Silver Peak wolves, I want to help them awaken safely. Then that's what we'll do, Philip agreed. Save Werewolf Society from Council remnants. Find other Silver Peak survivors. Build the life you actually want. Margaret leaned against her mate, feeling the bond between them humming with contentment. She thought about the advertisement that had started everything, all ranks welcome. Philip had meant it literally. Had designed his impossible trial to accept any wolf brave enough to try, knowing that somewhere among the rejected and overlooked was a Silver Peak waiting to be found. Margaret was glad she'd been brave enough to register. Because failing would have meant staying invisible forever. And she was done being invisible. Over the past 6 months, they'd traveled to 12 territories, identified and neutralized 43 council operatives, and freed hundreds of wolves from subtle manipulations they hadn't known existed. It was slow work. Exhausting work. Dangerous work. But it was meaningful. 3 weeks ago, they'd found another Silver Peak, a teenage boy who'd been living under suppression for 16 years, believing he was a defective beta. Margaret had personally overseen his awakening, had been there when he'd seen his true silver eyes for the first time, had helped him understand what he really was. The look on his face, the joy, the relief, the sudden understanding that he wasn't broken, had made everything worth it. What are you thinking? Philip asked. A rejected Omega passed an impossible trial by being resourceful instead of strong, technique over power, discovered she was secretly the most powerful bloodline in werewolf history, hidden by suppression magic, identity reveal, bonded with an alpha king who designed the trial specifically to find her, strategic romance, broke a 3-generation curse, heroic save, defeated a 200-year-old dark mage, power escalation, and spent 6 months systematically dismantling a centuries-old conspiracy while proving that being rejected was actually protection from people who would have killed her if they'd known what she was. Margaret went from too weak for any pack to want to powerful enough to terrify ancient mages, and showed that sometimes failing is just succeeding at something nobody told you was possible yet. Subscribe for more stories where the rejected Omega is secretly legendary, where impossible trials are recruitment missions, where being weak is perfect camouflage for being powerful, and where underdog wolves prove that rank means nothing when you're brave enough to challenge it. Real talk, should there be more stories about other suppressed Silver Peak wolves Margaret finds, or is her journey complete? A. More stories needed, finding and training other Silver Peak survivors deserves exploration. B. Journey complete, Margaret's arc reached its natural conclusion. C. Spin-off focus, show one of the allied alphas dealing with council remnants. D. Prequel, reveal what really happened during the Silver Peak hunts and how Margaret's parents hid her. Drop your answer below. Bonus, was Philip ethical in designing a trial specifically to find a Silver Peak, or was that manipulation even with good intentions? See you next time for more impossible trials, more hidden bloodlines, more proof that being Omega is sometimes just camouflage for being powerful. That sometimes being rejected is the best thing that can happen to you, Margaret said. Because it means you're free to become something better than what others expected. Philip kissed the top of her head. Spoken like a true Luna. Spoken like a former Omega who's had enough of other people's expectations, Margaret corrected. But she smiled. Because she'd passed the impossible trial. had awakened a silver peak, had helped dismantle a conspiracy and saved werewolf society. And most importantly, had proven that sometimes the weakest wolf is just the strongest one wearing a disguise. Sometimes being rejected meant you were too powerful for the people doing the rejecting. Sometimes failing meant you were succeeding at something nobody told you was possible yet. And sometimes the Omega nobody wanted turned out to be exactly what everyone needed. Margaret had learned all of that the hard way. And she wouldn't change a single moment of it. Because every rejection, every hardship, every year of suppression had led her here, to a mate who saw her worth, to a purpose that mattered, to a life where she finally got to be powerful instead of pretending to be weak. The rejected Omega had become a queen. And she was just getting started.